Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for streaming with us. I'm Phil Lipoff. A big change in the fight against COVID. The CDC has changed its guidance on isolation time for people infected or exposed to the virus. As the Omicron surge puts a major strain on hospitals and businesses, President Biden speaking out about the White House's testing plan.
But it's not enough. It's clearly not enough.
And as the number of COVID cases spike in children, almost 200,000 testing positive just last week. That's up about 50% since the beginning of the month. Dr. John Brownstein will join us live once again this morning. And the holiday travel chaos continues. There are already more than 600 flights canceled this morning so far. The rise in COVID cases taking a toll on pilots, flight attendants, and other essential staff as passengers' frustrations start to boil over. This woman attacking an older man on this Delta flight. Surveillance and body camera footage has been released in a fatal police shooting of a 14-year-old girl in a department store dressing room. A stray bullet piercing the wall as police responded to a disturbance in the store, what the LAPD is now revealing. But we are going to begin this morning with the new guidance from the CDC, cutting the time for isolation in half after testing positive for COVID. This comes as an alarming surge in pediatric COVID cases and hospitalizations are raising questions now about whether children should return to school following this holiday break. ABC's Victor Akendo with the latest.
This morning, the number of children hospitalized with COVID-19 surging. Nearly 200,000 more children tested positive for COVID last week, up by about 50% since the beginning of December, according to a new report from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Children's Hospital Association.
The most important thing you can do as a parent right now is get your child vaccinated if they qualify for the vaccine, if they're 5 and up. If they don't qualify for the vaccine, make sure everyone else around them is vaccinated.
Children accounting for about 20% of cases last week. Ann Gordon's 5-year-old is vaccinated, but her 2-year-old isn't. She's worried about infection and daycare possibly shutting down.
We're going to be closed at least for the first week of January, and it started filling me with all of the PTSD that happened last year when we had kids out of school and were full-time working. So I'm scared for what's going to happen in January.
But with the Omicron variant bearing down on the U.S., the CDC is now updating guidance for asymptomatic Americans infected with COVID-19, cutting the isolation period in half from 10 to 5 days, followed by strict mask wearing for another 5 days. Same for their close contacts who may have been exposed. The CDC recommending a minimum 5-day quarantine if they are unvaccinated or late for their booster. They added the exposed should wear a mask around others for at least 5 days after their quarantine is over. But even as health officials adjust guidance, President Biden warning some hospitals will be overrun and says more needs to be done to get tests to those who need them.
Seeing how tough it was for some folks to get a test this weekend shows that we have more work to do, and we're doing it.
We saw that in Florida, where the number of new cases rose more than 300% in just 1 week. Here in Miami, the lines for testing snaking around parking lots and around city blocks. Some left waiting for hours.
I've been here since 6:45.
Similar scenes in Massachusetts.
It's like, how many places are we going to go to where they say, sorry, no testing? And it's like, I have to work.
The White House planning to send out 500 million free test kits starting next month. But in New York, a $100 incentive for the booster appears to be working.
We announced the booster incentive back on Tuesday. I'm very happy to say New Yorkers are responding. Almost 180,000 New Yorkers have gotten that booster just since Tuesday.
In order to help with the demand for testing, Miami-Dade County distributed nearly 140,000 at-home test kits yesterday alone. But judging by what we're seeing here again this morning, that barely made a dent. Phil?
Victor Akendo at a testing site in Miami. Thank you. Now to this new extreme measure being taken in Europe as cases are skyrocketing there. Lama Hassan has the details from London. Lama?
Well, with a number of COVID-19 cases skyrocketing in France, reaching more than 100,000 cases over the holiday weekend, the French Prime Minister declaring they're in a race against time, announcing tighter new restrictions to combat the record rise in cases. So, beginning January 3rd, people will have to work from home at least 3 days a week, and if possible, 4 days for at least 3 weeks. Masks will become mandatory outdoors in all city centres, Elsewhere in Europe, Greece also grappling with the sharp rise in cases, bringing in new rules with a curfew for clubs and bars, which will be closing at midnight for the first 2 weeks of January. But back here in England, despite the high number of COVID cases, the government announcing no new restrictions before the new year, but urging people to be especially careful as we approach the New Year celebrations. But the Prime Minister Boris Johnson saying that they will continue to monitor the data carefully. Lama Hassan, ABC News, London.
Lama, thank you. Joining me now for more on the Omicron variant is Chief Innovation Officer, Boston Children's Hospital, and ABC News medical contributor, Dr. John Brownstein. Dr. Brownstein, thanks so much. It's great to have you here to sort through all of this. And this morning, there's something pretty big to sort through. So let's start with that major news from the CDC, cutting in half the isolation time for people with asymptomatic COVID infections from 10 days down to 5. Given how rapidly Omicron is spreading across the country, first, is 5 days of quarantine enough to stop the spread of the variant, do you think?
Well, good morning, Phil. I do think 5 days is enough, but with some caveats. I mean, we have to be updating the science on isolation as we accumulate more data. We know more about infectiousness and transmission. And so what we know now is that 5 days is probably enough because, we have 1 to 2 days prior to symptom onset, you can be shedding virus, and probably 2 to 3 days after that, you're still contagious. So that 5-day average makes a lot of sense. Remember, we're also balancing the fact that we're trying to get people to adhere to isolation. We know that there's the economic burden of isolation. So, as we have just so many cases, we have to be realistic in terms of what we can expect people to do. There's a couple caveats. If you have any ongoing symptoms, you need to do that full isolation of 10 days, or at least until those symptoms subside. And also, masking is important. If you are out at 5 days, keep wearing that mask for another 5 days. That will help reduce transmission. We know that Omicron really has changed the game, and there's just so much transmission taking place in the community. So whatever you can do to limit the risk to others is super important.
You mentioned being contagious. I have a couple questions on that in just a minute. But first, the CDC is also not requiring people to get a negative test result to end isolation. Is that a mistake, do you think, to not require at least one negative test?
That baffles me a little bit, I have to say, because not everyone can clear the virus in about 5 days. Some people take 3 days. Some people can be over 10 days. And so things have changed, especially people are testing earlier with Omicron. So I'm worried. And in fact, I'm recommending to my friends who are finding themselves infected to get that rapid test. And if they're negative after 5 days, that's a good sort of sign that they can leave isolation still with masking. But, I don't know why CDC didn't recommend it. It might be because of lack of availability of tests, but that shouldn't be a reason why, we shouldn't be requiring, at least asking people to get that additional, layer of protection.
Yeah, the testing is a problem. The president and the administration says that will get better in the coming weeks. But right now, as you saw in Victor's piece, lines for testing, and it's just really difficult. What I love having you here for is not just your expertise, but answering the questions that so many people are asking. And this is one that we've heard a lot. If you've had COVID, say, for a week or a week and a half or something, and you can test, still test positive, right? But when do you know you're not contagious anymore if you still can test positive? What's the best way to figure that out?
Right. And of course, it depends on the test as well. The PCR test is very sensitive and has been the gold standard. It can identify pre-contagious period, during contagious, but also post. And so you can test positive on the PCR for many days, but actually not be shedding enough virus to transmit. This is why I really like the rapid test, even the at-home test, because that is a direct measure of contagiousness. And so if you can get access to those at-home tests, or you can go to an antigen, a testing site, and you test negative, I would feel much more confident that you can get out of isolation. Now, I think that additional masking is super helpful, but that really is a good test and a good marker of the fact that you were not shedding enough virus to put yourself at risk to others.
All right, we're coming out of the holiday season, Christmas most recently, and we are heading into New Year's, both times where people gather with family. Looking ahead to the New Year, which is just in a few days now, should people be keeping in mind as they think about celebrating that COVID still is spreading? And I know a lot of people are going to be gathering in Times Square. Are you concerned about these things?
Yeah, Oh, for sure. I mean, we've seen this situation before. We're sort of in the middle of a surge and a big holiday where people are moving, they're gathering. You know, it's all on us to try to reduce transmission as we head into these coming weeks. And so, obviously vaccination is our best weapon, but testing is super critical, especially as you go into a gathering. If you don't have availability of testing, if you have symptoms, I would just assume that you are likely positive and to not travel or gather. Obviously, masking, social distancing, all the things that we know work, good ventilation. I am worried though, we always have the situation of a surge and then you layer on a holiday and that's when you get an explosion of cases. And what we're trying to do is, of course, limit severe illness that could impact our health systems, cause unnecessary hospitalizations and unfortunately deaths.
And that leads me to this final question. We heard in Victor's piece about the reported rise in COVID cases among children. Given the spike in pediatric cases and hospitalizations, some school districts are weighing whether to delay returning to school after the holidays. This is certainly a hot button topic. What's your take on it? And do you think students and teachers should be tested before going back to class?
I think this far into the pandemic, I think unnecessary quarantine and closures is just too much for our kids. I think we know enough now to prevent that. So we know that it's about masking, social distancing, good ventilation, and testing. We've had this concept of a test to stay program. It's at my kid's school. You test and you decide, identify anybody who might be infected, and then they have to stay home and isolate, but you don't necessarily impose that on the entire school body. Kids need to be in school. They need it for their mental health, for their social, interactions. And so I would say, let's focus on testing, and we know it works, and keep our kids in school in the new year. I mean, they all need it.
Yeah, exactly the way my son's school's working as well. Dr. John Brownstein, thanks so much for taking the time this morning. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much.
All right, now to the growing travel mess. More than 600 flights already canceled this morning. That's on top of thousands already canceled this holiday season as Omicron tears through the country and airline staff. Frustration boiling over amid cancellations and pandemic-related travel rules. Alex Perez with the latest.
This morning, more people stranded after the holidays. Airlines canceled about 1,100 domestic flights Monday, many due to staffing shortages as Omicron cases surge.
It's the holidays. I was hoping it wouldn't be me, but I mean, everybody's going through it. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it doesn't get delayed again.
And with the pandemic still raging, travelers' frustrations are boiling over. With over 5,700 unruly passenger reports this year alone, over the holiday on this Atlanta-bound Delta flight, a verbal altercation escalates and gets physical as a female passenger confronts and punches an older man. Police arrested the woman, and the FBI is now leading the investigation.
Stop!
And on this Delta flight just before Christmas, the video obtained by TMZ, passengers scream as two men throw punches on a late-night flight from LA to Memphis, crashing into the seats around them. The fight allegedly sparked over mask wearing until other passengers stepped in to break it up. The men declined to press charges against each other and were not detained. Delta telling ABC News, while unruly passenger incidents are rare, there is no place for them on our aircraft. But 2 years into the pandemic, COVID-19 protocols are still leading to challenges on some flights. And while fights over COVID restrictions can still flare up, Dr. Anthony Fauci says a vaccine mandate for domestic travelers may be necessary.
When you make vaccination a requirement, that's another incentive to get more people vaccinated. If you want to do that with domestic flights, I think that's something that seriously should be considered.
And Phil, here's a reminder that a lot of people forget about. If your flight was canceled or severely delayed, you can get a refund. You just have to ask the airline. Phil?
A lot of people asking this morning. Alex, thank you. Now to that major winter storm system barreling across the country. Massive snowfall, frigid temperatures in the west. And as that storm system heads to the middle of the country and the northeast this morning. Rob Marciano tracking it.
This morning, wild weather moving out of the west and into the plains. More than 20 states on alert for dangerous winter weather. Blizzard conditions in Minnesota with harsh winds and whiteout conditions impeding the roadways. In Washington state, record low temperatures and heavy snowfall. In California's Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly 10 feet of snow falling in just 7 days. Dangerous driving conditions shutting down roads there. And avalanche warnings in effect in the regions of the Sierra and the Rockies. Officials warning conditions are ripe for devastation. Treacherous travel conditions in the Lake Tahoe area. This tree falling on top of a vehicle. And in nearby Truckee, 43-year-old skier Rory Angelota missing since Christmas. Authorities desperately searching. The last ping on his cell phone detected in the mountains.
Unfortunately, the problem with this search, as is with a lot of these winter searches, is the weather creates logistical and safety issues with searching. We are doing everything we can to find Rory. However, we have an obligation to the rescuers, too, to make sure that we're not asking them to do anything that is dangerous, and we don't want to turn one tragedy into two.
And in Colorado, a wildfire burning in Jefferson County, prompting evacuations and closing a highway. The road now back open and evacuations lifted.
Rob Marciano, thank you for that. Coming up, the just-released surveillance and body camera video of the police shooting of a 14-year-old girl. What the LAPD is saying about the incident this morning when we return. Welcome back, everyone. The Los Angeles Police Department has now released new surveillance and body camera video in the police shooting death of a 14-year-old girl killed by a stray bullet as officers fired at an assault suspect at a Los Angeles department store. Zoreen Shah has the latest.
This morning, LAPD releasing surveillance and body camera video of officers opening fire in a North Hollywood department store. One of the bullets hitting and killing 14-year-old Valentina Orellana Peralta, who was out of sight in a changing room.
He's hitting right on the right-hand side.
LAPD saying the incident happened when police were responding to reports of an assault with a deadly weapon out of Burlington last Thursday at the peak of Christmas rush.
There's a guy with a gun. They're inside and everybody's running away, evacuating the building.
Police were responding to reports of an active shooter. They shot and killed Daniel Elena Lopez, who turned out not to be carrying a gun, but was attacking several customers with a bike lock. One of the police bullets went through a wall, striking Valentina in a dressing room, who died in her mother's arms.
She's bleeding.
Her mother's attorney saying they want LAPD to release all the video from the scene and for the officer to be held accountable.
There was no weapon, there was no active shooter. And so that may be multiple problems, whether it be a system failure, whether it be somebody who just shouldn't have even been on the job.
One officer is on paid leave. As for Valentina, her mom and dad are speaking out today for the first time in just a few hours. Phil?
Zoreen, thank you for that. Now to the driving and the severe weather. We all try to do this at the beginning of winter with winter storm advisories and alerts stretching from coast to coast. Matt Gutman is in snowy Reno, Nevada with tips on how to safely navigate through black ice.
This morning, hundreds of thousands of motorists facing that post-Christmas wintry blast. Dozens of vehicles sliding off the roads this past holiday weekend. This SUV in Washington gliding off a hill and down the road. And in Minnesota, a 3-car wreck on Interstate 94. A December record of 193 inches of snow in California's Sierras, where so many, like my own family, were stranded since Christmas.
This is our third consecutive day of trying to make a break for it. The roads are open for the first time in a couple days, and we are really going to try.
Snow clearance operations overwhelmed. This machine slowly chewing up that snow and spitting it out. The wind blasting roads with snow, creating those whiteout conditions.
So it's been an hour into our drive. We've made it about 6 miles so far.
At times, we drove less than 10 miles an hour. It was hard to tell where the snowdrifts ended and the road began. And everywhere, abandoned cars encased in cement-like snow. Even plows getting stuck.
Called a good friend of mine at the California Highway Patrol, asked for any tips for driving in the snow. He said, yes, 3. Slow, slower, and slow.
And for millions of drivers facing black ice, that advice can be life-saving.
I'm only doing 30 miles an hour, but if I slam on the brakes, you can see that with no system active, you can see that I don't have any control. I'm just sliding no matter what steering input I put in.
Our Gio Benitez heading to Chevrolet's test track in 2019 to see how quickly a little patience can make a big difference.
What should people do when they're on this road and they see this black ice and they hit the black ice?
You can drive across this slippery surface with very light throttle inputs, very slight steering inputs, and the vehicle doesn't spin out of control because there's nothing upsetting the vehicle.
And when you do need to turn, no matter what kind of car you're driving, the experts say perform one action at a time. While still in a straight line, gently press on the brake to slow the vehicle. Once at a safe speed, release the brake and then make your turn. Once the wheel is straight again, that's when you accelerate. Steering combined with braking or accelerating increases your chances of losing control.
You should try to do one and only one thing at the same time.
If you can't avoid a fishtail, you want to steer calmly in the direction you want to go.
Basically, if the rear of the vehicle is moving to the right, you want to steer to the right.
Finally, the Gutmans made it to Interstate 80, which links Reno and Sacramento, parts of which remain closed this morning. We got lucky with that pair of snowplows clearing the way ahead of us. 4 hours later to the Nevada line and clearer roads. All right, Phil, so the Gutman family is in Reno. We've got to get to Los Angeles. It's probably more than 8 hours with two very tired kids. But in case we encounter more black ice or snow along the way, which is very likely, we now have those really important tips. Key is to go slow, slow, slower, as the California Highway Patrol likes to say, and to only apply one action at a time. These are really easy to remember, so we're going to use them. Hopefully other people can benefit from them at home as well. Phil.
Matt, thank you. The Gutman family vacation is riveting this year. We hope you get to where you're going safely. Coming up, the award-winning director behind Big Little Lies passing away suddenly. We have more on the tributes pouring in when we come back. Welcome back, everyone. Tributes continue to pour in this morning after the sudden death of award-winning director Jean-Marc Vallée. As his producing partner told ABC News, Jean-Marc stood for creativity and authenticity. Kaylee Hartung with the details.
We should scream and beat our breasts and tear our hair. Don't you feel angry?
He was the award-winning filmmaker, best known for directing the hit series Big Little Lies.
I was holding on to this idea of perfection so tight.
This morning, tributes pouring in from Hollywood and beyond for Canadian director, producer, and editor Jean-Marc Vallée, as we learn more about his sudden death over the holiday weekend. Sources tell ABC News the likely cause of death, a heart attack, though officially it is yet to be determined.
His passing came as shock and surprise. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and probably the healthiest 58-year-old I know.
The acclaimed director got his start making short films, but made his mainstream mark in the industry helming Dallas Buyers Club.
Mr. Woodruff, we estimate that you have approximately 30 days.
The film earning a Best Picture Oscar nomination and snagging acting statues for Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto.
All right, all right, all right.
Vallée would then foray into television, directing and writing the first season of HBO's Emmy-winning drama Big Little Lies, picking up his own Emmy in the process.
And the Emmy goes to Jean-Marc Vallée.
His closest friends and colleagues among those sharing their tributes online. Reese Witherspoon tweeting, "My heart is broken." Nicole Kidman saying, "I'm shattered. He was at the center of my creative universe." And Matthew McConaughey adding, "Love stories were everywhere in his eye." Jean-Marc Vallée was 58.
And Phil, Jean-Marc Vallée was very careful about choosing the projects that he would take on, once explaining that choosing your film is choosing your lifestyle, and saying he would ask himself, are you going to be happy waking up every morning doing this and serving it? Our condolences to his family and his two sons. Phil.
Absolutely, Kaylee. Thank you so much. I'm Phil Lipoff, and thank you for joining us. The news continues with the latest context and analysis right here on ABC News Live.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.